All right. Greetings to those of you who are already online. I'm Kate, the Communications and Outreach Coordinator for the Natural Areas Association. I want to welcome you to this webinar. We are doing iDigBio using digital specimen data in biodiversity conservation planning and implementation. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes, but while we're waiting for everyone to log in, I always like to ask a question or hear some more about you guys. And today's question is, I'm curious as to, and nobody needs to get into this too deeply, but just some of the ways in which you guys are using digital data in your work. If you could give me just an example. And what I'm going to ask you to do is practice a little by using the chat box, which we're going to be using for questions and answers for Molly and Gil today. So locate the chat box and open it up. Make sure that it's to everyone, so all panelists and attendees. And let me know how you use information in your work. I'm going to restate that question. Oops. All right. Can everybody hear me? Let me know, just if a couple of people could just say, yeah, I know, I can hear you. Molly says she can hear me. Cool. Theodore says conservation planning, advocacy, legal protection of ecosystems. That covers a lot. Thank you. That's helpful. Thanks, Erica and Kelly and Bruce. I'm glad you guys can hear me. That's cool. You never know. So thank you. Yeah, and if you obviously take a second to think about how you use digital data in your work and let us know. Milo says he uses it for viewing herbarium specimens and getting location data. Cool. That's really interesting. Thank you, you guys. I appreciate that so much. So it is officially noon. In fact, you might be able to hear the church bell outside the window. And so I'm going to start my spiel a little bit here. So again, welcome to iDigBio using digital specimen data in biodiversity conservation planning and implementation. And we are welcoming today Gil Nelson of Florida State University and Molly Phillips of the University of Florida, who are both very central to the iDigBio project. So we want to really say that we're very grateful to have them with us today. Gil and Molly will both be speaking at the 2018 Natural Areas Conference too. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that in a second, but we're just glad that they're going to have an opportunity to tell you even more. So if you're interested in today's presentation, there's more. Okay, I'm going to share my screen and get us started with some slides here. Okay. Okay, everybody knows where they are then in the iDigBio webinar. Thanks. It looks like everybody is pretty much up on the chat box, so let's take it away. I wanted to introduce me and the organization that I work for and the organization that is offering you these great webinars, and that's the Natural Areas Association. Many of you, of course, already know us, and if you do, take a few seconds, because I think you've heard some of this before. But those of you who have not, I wanted to tell you a little bit about us. We've been working to support the community of natural areas practitioners for more than 40 years. We have a very long history. We're coming up on our 45th annual conference. We're extremely proud of that number. And more on the conference in just a second. We are the only national nonprofit membership organization dedicated to the support and nurture and advancement of the community of natural areas professionals. That is our mission. That's our entire mission. We are here for people exactly like you. So many of you already know us through the journal. There's a picture of the journal there from last July with Sticky Morrison on the cover. The journal comes free with a membership to the Natural Areas Association. It's a really great place for scientists and natural areas professionals to share research, and it's focused on land managers. I encourage everyone to submit to the Natural Areas Journal. It's a really great journal, and it really is different from other journals that you might submit to in that it's focused on the needs of people who are looking at land management specifically. So it can be a really great help to those people, and if you haven't submitted in a while, we'd love to see your name. So. We also hold the Natural Areas Conference annually. That's the premier gathering for natural areas professionals. This year it's in Bloomington, Indiana. I'm going to tell you more about that in a second. At the beginning of the year, we debuted a new website and member portal, and we're really enjoying using that, and I think our members are too. It gives you host to a lot of new resources and gives you access to a host of new resources and tools. Members have online access to all of the copies of the Natural Areas Journal back to 1981. The disco age, with a simple click from the member portal, and we're very proud to be able to offer these perks to members. Speaking of membership, we invite you to become a member if you haven't already. It's easy. Individual memberships start at about $75 a year, which if you think about it is less than a Netflix membership, and it's less than one fancy coffee per week. So you get the journal, discounted access to the conference, and a lot of other member benefits. And as you'll learn, you can actually join the Natural Areas Association as the process for registering for the 2019 conference, which is super convenient, and I recommend it. All right. A little bit about our webinar series. They're part of our continuing commitment to bring you the latest information. We're all about bringing the information that natural areas practitioners need to them when they need it. So this is sort of this is our sweet spot. This series is currently free to all attendees. There is an archive that will be put up as soon as I can possibly get it up afterwards. You will get a link in a follow-up email. It's also going to be on the NAA YouTube channel, or you can access it through our site. If you're interested in data and technology and how natural areas managers use them in general, and I'm pretty sure you are interested, the conference this year is going to have an entire session on maximizing data and technology to inform natural areas management, as well as other programming on how to use data. So think about attending. Our upcoming webinar, I wanted to say a little bit about that. It's going to be on July 18th, noon Eastern, and we're featuring Matt Denniston, who's the founding and managing partner of Sitka Technology Group. Sitka was at the conference last year. Some of you may have met them. They're really great guys. They build and offer some very interesting tools for natural areas practitioners. And this webinar is going to be going over one of their kind of one of their bigger, more robust tools. It's an entire open source platform that can help usually larger land management organizations, public, private, whatever, who are managing multiple projects across multiple partners. This is kind of what they do well. So take a chance, come and listen, and you can find out how that's being used by other organizations. We also want to remind people that our regional workshop is still, the registration is still open. That's going to be July 10th and 11th. This is going to be the greatest workshop. I'm a little prejudiced. We just did a tour of all the sites last week, and honestly, it was sensational. The people who are going to be speaking to you about these projects are incredibly passionate about their work, and they're very knowledgeable, and the results that they've achieved in these sites need to be seen to be believed. They're really, really wonderful. We're partnering with the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, and the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources to give this to you. So please consider, if you're anywhere in the area, we got people coming down from Indiana, I know for sure, and some other people from out of state. It's going to take place in PA and Ohio, in kind of the map is on the website if you want to go look. You can register for a regional workshop under the Learn tab, under the Natural Areas Association website. So I highly recommend it. It's going to be gorgeous and highly informative. I'm almost done, I promise. So the 2018 Natural Areas Conference registration is open. We're very happy about that. It was a little bit of a lift because it's the first year that we're offering registration ourselves rather than through a third-party person. So very proud. We've got so much going on. This is really an incredibly strong program. Symposia includes leveraging data and technology, which I mentioned before. And along with our regular offerings and field workshops, one of our field workshops is canoeing through karst caves. So we're offering 6 ID workshops that we expect to be very popular, speaking of identification. We're also offering a full-day workshop on the recent released information from the Xerces Society on best management practices for pollinators in natural areas. We're really happy to host them. To give you some ideas, some of the symposia you can expect are growing regional partnerships to address invasive species, conserving and managing karst systems, collaboration in urban natural areas restoration, using the native seed strategy and restoration work. We've got a lot of great stuff. Plenary speakers include Professor Scott Russell Sanderson, the writer, and former National Park Service Director Jim Jarvis. And early bird rate is available till August 31st. Okay, so close. All right, please go to our website for more information. I really hope to see you there. Bloomington is gorgeous if you haven't been there, and it's really worth a trip, as is, of course, the conference. This is just the last thing I wanted to say. Thanks to our partner, the U.S. Forest Service, for supporting this series of webinars. And with that, I want to introduce Gil and Molly. They're going to take it away. They're kind of going to share responsibilities here. And remember that you can type in your questions at any time in the chat box. They'll be able to see it. And they'll definitely pause and answer some of your questions when they have a chance. So just a reminder, Gil and Molly, remember to unmute yourselves. Gil, please take it away. I will stop my share. While Gil's getting queued up here, some other people have said, Deborah says, digital data has been used by our Department of Natural Resources staff for our current list and revisions to it of the threatened and endangered species list. Awesome.
Okay. We're ready to go?
Yep.
Good. So my name is Gil Nelson. I am with iDigBio at Florida State University. And I specialize here in digitization, implementation, and research, and putting and mobilizing data so that it can be used by scientists and the general public. I also, I guess one of the reasons that I came to work for iDigBio is because my past background was as a field biologist working in natural areas management, worked for a lot of state agencies and federal government agencies and private concerns, looking at lands that were being managed and conserved and trying to provide assistance with that. And I could see that iDigBio was going to really make that a much easier job than it had been, and was very excited about trying to participate in getting so much digital data out there. I also have a fellowship at Tall Timbers Research Station in Land Conservancy, which of course is very much into land management and conservation.
And I'm Molly Phillips. I am iDigBio's Education, Outreach, and Diversity Coordinator. I have a background in ecology and wildlife conservation. I've worked for Florida Fish and Wildlife, but I've also spent a lot of time in museum collections. So I've done some, and I also worked as a BASH coordinator for an airfield managing wildlife to reduce bird strikes. So I'm really interested in how you can apply and how you can use data for applied management. So I'm really excited to be here today, so thank you.
And yeah, I really want to thank Kate for inviting us to do this. We've been looking forward to it. We're very interested in making these data available and helping folks learn how to use the stuff that we've been working hard to produce. So I'm going to start with just a little introduction to what iDigBio is and how it got started, and the National Science Foundation involvement in it, and the size and all of that, and some of our resources that are available. And then Molly is going to follow that with a demo of the portal and the kinds of data that you can actually access and how you can use it, download it, etc., for your own work. We do encourage people to ask questions. We don't mind getting questions in the middle of things. We might sometimes ignore them because we don't see them, but I think Kate might straighten us out with that, I hope. And so please feel free to quote interrupt anytime you want. So there are probably in museums and academic collections across the United States, we've been having a very difficult time getting a real handle on this. We think it's somewhere between 500 million and 1 billion specimens in the US. Now that probably doesn't count fish larvae in a jar, of which there could be hundreds of thousands in one jar, or phytoplankton in a jar, of which there could be millions. But in terms of most museum specimens that biologists work with in the field and for conservation, we're thinking somewhere between 500,000 and a billion. And our job is to get all of those digitized, which I'll explain more in just a minute. Now, worldwide, there may be 3 billion, 2 billion, 6 billion. We don't really know that. Nobody ever seems to count these museum specimens, and nobody ever goes through an herbarium and counts all the specimens that are in the herbarium. They have numbering systems and they think they know, and what they know generally when we get through digitizing an institution is it's either much larger or much smaller than what they had always anticipated. So in, let me get this slide to change again. So in an effort to try to make these available for science, the National Science Foundation instituted back in 2011 a $100 million program called Advancing the Digitization of Biodiversity Collections, recognizing that these collections sitting in museums and academic collections around the country were very useful, but they weren't being used in the way they could be, particularly by folks who are in conservation and land management, because they just don't have the access to them by going to a particular institution if they're not near an institution. And if they do that, then they really end up looking at the one institution, which might be relevant, but there may be collections in many other places. And so when they started this program, iDigBio, which was a joint collaborative project between the University of Florida and Florida State University, were funded to be the national coordinators for this project. And so we are funded really for public non-federal collections. So we can't spend our money helping federal collections learn how to digitize, but we are pretty selfish and we can certainly take their data. And we do take their data. And so the Natural History Museum at Smithsonian, we have data from them. We have data from other countries in the world, some of which have specimens that were actually collected in some of your locales, but may be stored in some place in Brazil when some Brazilian researcher was up here working and took things home with him. So you never know what you might find through the portal. I will point out that iDigBio is primarily specimen-based. I appreciated Milo's comment regarding looking up specimens. We work with vouchered specimens. We do not serve observational data. That doesn't mean we don't like observational data. It just means the scope of our charge is to get museum specimen data out and available to the public. So we think that a combination of those data and observational data sometimes provide a very good match of data for research and conservation. Our goal is to facilitate and enable digitization of all of these how many there are specimens in the United States. If there are 1 billion, we would like to facilitate the digitization of 1 billion of them. We want to make them all available for use. We work in all 50 states. There are about 20 thematic collections networks, or TCNs. Those are collaborations of institutions, some 8 or 10 in the collaboration, some 100 or more in a collaboration. And those collaborations have the difficult challenge of deciding what questions would we like to answer and what are the data that we would need available to answer those grand challenge difficult questions. And then how do we go about getting those data together and making them available? And once they decide this and the NSF thinks it's a good plan and they get funding, then their job is really to produce the data, not do the research, produce the data so that some of the rest of us can be doing that research as those data become available. So we work with about 709 collections in the US right now. There are about, we think, 1,600 collections of all types, including biological field stations and others. And when we talk about digitized resources that are held in these collections, it's oftentimes way more than just the specimens themselves. There are field notes and other kinds of documentation and white papers and reports to agencies, element occurrence records from natural heritage programs, all sorts of stuff that are in these collections. And in a perfect world, we would love to see all of these digitized electronically and available to researchers and to land managers and folks like you guys. These collections hold specimens, obviously, lots and lots of data, and we think sometimes that folks don't fully appreciate the kind of data and the breadth of data that are held and that are found on specimen labels and in the assorted materials that go with these specimens. And then, of course, they give you leads to experts, people that have done these collections, or people that are managing those collections or curating those collections. So that's very important. One very important thing to me that I think I really like to get across today as much as anything is, if we could have easily accessible vouchered records, specimen records, available for people that work in land management, natural areas, state parks, federal installations, whatever, then we believe that we would have a much better understanding of the biota that occur in those parks and that occur on those lands. And we think the best way to do that is through vouchered specimens. I can tell you a story very briefly that I was working for the Natural Areas Inventory in Florida, which is our heritage program, and I was sent out to discover these, quote, historical plants. And I went out and I found some old collections in the historical plants, and then I went out looking for the plants, and wow, man, I found some. That was really great. And then finally, when I did my entire project, I realized that the plant that I had found was a plant that another really good botanist and I had been calling something else for a long time, because we never really bothered to look at the vouchers that were collected to determine whether or not we had the right name on it. And then we discovered that the Apalachicola River turned out to be the dividing line between it and a very closely related plant that we had been calling it for all these years. So the voucher data allowed us to go back to the herbarium and say, hey, you know, these things are misnamed. We need to straighten this out. And by doing that, it means now that that data is all updated for any future biologists and park folks that want to take a look at it. So we're a big fan of vouchered specimens. So digitization, and I think this is very important. Some people, when you say digitization, they think you mean we're taking a picture. Some people think you are just entering data. In fact, digitization is the conversion of any analog material in a museum, or anything else for that matter, but in our world it's museum and collections. It is the conversion of those to digital format, making them available in basically ones and zeros in an electronic file somewhere. So when you take a picture, you're not taking a picture, you are recording the data into another format that happens to be digital and reproducible and movable in a way that the physical specimen is not. And when you enter data into a database, you are digitizing those data by typing them into a system that can then be reproduced with many other software packages. And so for us, digitization is converting anything from analog to digital. And I think that's a very important distinction. So labels, we can take labels, enter them into a database. We can take pictures inside of some type of a box, picture box, or an open camera stand. Some of our folks are digitizing by doing 3D images of specimens. We have a brand new project that is doing CT scans of 20,000 vertebrate specimens stored in ethanol, which means that project will have 80% of the vertebrate genera with example 3D CT scans available through iDigBio and MorphoSource, which I can talk more about, or you can email me about. The point of the matter is, it's anything digital is what we're trying to do, and that's what we're all about. So we have all kinds of stuff. These are some specimens, obviously plant specimens. We have vertebrate specimens like this bat. We have lots of birds, lots of insects. This is just one insect pulled out of a drawer. You know, insects can be hundreds in a drawer. It's very important, I think, to be using these data in all of our work. Right now, the iDigBio portal serves almost 111 million records. We think those 111 million records probably represent 300 to 400 million specimens, because many of these specimens, for example, fish or insects, there are many specimens in one collecting event. And so you have a tray of insects all collected at the same time. They may get one number, and so they're one collection object. but contain a lot of specimens within. Jars of fishes, the same way. Jars of frogs, the same way. If the individual specimen is not tagged, but the jar is, and we know what's in that jar, then that jar becomes a collection object, which might represent many more specimens. So our resource at iDigBio is a real source of digitized collections data for virtually anybody. It was initially designed, we thought, for researchers, although the National Science Foundation sort of had in mind that this would raise the profiles of museums and raise the profile of biodiversity data so that amateurs and school teachers and just interested folks could see what museums hold. And so it would make museums available in a way, and biodiversity available in a way to the general public that hadn't been done before. But we focus much on education and outreach, which Molly does, and on researchers. So it's open for everybody. This is what the portal looks like. You can see we have a few records, and many of them are in the US, but you can see other parts of the world. We are very closely allied with Australia. We have colleagues in Australia. We have many colleagues in Europe, and we are working closely to build a closer working relationship so that our data are available, even those that are US records in other countries. So very excited about that. This is the portal that Molly will show you much more about in a few minutes. But here's kind of an example. So if you were interested in red-cockaded woodpeckers, for example, in the southeastern United States, this is a map that could have been created, was created from the iDigBio portal, pulling records out and taking a look at their densities in terms of numbers. This is another map of the woodpecker that shows where they've been collected, and that's the dark blue dots on top of some ecoregion maps, which is pretty helpful. You can kind of get an idea that most of these are coastal plain species, although there are a few others, and we'd have to figure out what those are. Overlaid on forest maps so that you can see the types of habitats these birds might lay in. And I don't know why that happened. Maybe that was the last thing I had. Yeah, I think I want to move to Molly. But the point of the matter is that these data can then be mapped in ways, and you can download them in ways to use them in your own work as you look at your own lands that you're working on, or if you're consulting with other folks, the lands that they manage and they own.
You want me to start sharing, Gil?
That would be great.
Alrighty.
Yeah, and while we're doing that, I just wanted to remind people that if you've got questions, please type them into the chat box so that everybody can see them.
Alrighty. And let me open my chat real quick too. Oh,
Let me say one thing, Molly. I see these questions. Can the iDigBio samples be used for image matching, such as for species identification? Yes, and there are some very exciting projects going on right now. We're working with a group in France, a group of about 5 or 6 researchers, and one in Costa Rica, who are using convolutional neural networks to develop deep learning algorithms, and they've been up to 80% successful in identifying plants to species, and off of many of the herbarium sheets that came out of the iDigBio portal. And we are now working with that group to help us automate phenological traits so that we can say, okay, this plant was in fruit or flower, so that we can rapidly look at phenological data without having to review and make a decision on every single specimen in a sheet. So yes, they can be. We're working on that and hope to make that happen.
All right. And I finally found my chat box too, so that helps.
Yeah, I know.
But
Okay.
maybe Gil can stop me if someone has a question, and I'll just kind of run through a few features of our search portal, hoping to kind of guess at what you guys might be interested in looking at when you come to the portal and explore it for yourself. So you can find the portal first of all through the iDigBio website, which is www.idigbio.org, and by clicking on the Search the Portal button. And it immediately will pull up all of the records that we have. And as Gil said, it's almost 111 million. The first kind of box that, and actually what I'm going to do is show you a few other resources beyond our search records page. You'll see that there's some tabs here, and I really wanted to highlight these different resources before moving on. So if you go to data and then publishers, this is the people that really did all of the work. We're an aggregator, but this lists everybody that has given us data. So if you're interested at that level, you can go and search by different record sets. So if you're interested in herbarium or collaborating with a museum, you can find information at the kind of publisher level. We also have been doing a good faith effort to kind of track all collections in the United States, not just people that are currently sharing data with us. And so if you're interested in finding collections in your area, you can filter results through any of these fields here and search for collections, as well as interact with this map here. And so these collections don't necessarily have data in our portal. We're just trying to kind of understand where all of the collections in the United States are, so we can build relationships in the community. But we also wanted to share that information with you all because, just because someone isn't digitized doesn't mean they might not have valuable specimens that you'd want to look at. All right, so, and then also, and finally, we have a learning center. Do I have that open? There it is. So this has a portal tutorial, which will kind of go through the basics of what I'm going to go through today. Also some information about our API. So if you wanted to interact with iDigBio's data directly, not through our search portal, but through the API, you can. Also, there's some information about georeferencing for research use. And some information about our partners, the Carpentries, which are working to give people better data and software skills. And I highly recommend looking into these groups and see if there is a workshop in your area. And then we also have a genetic resources tab, which talks about all of the genetic and DNA repositories around the world. Okay, but let's go back and look at, so this is our home page for the portal, and you'll see that there's a way to actually search by kingdom. So it's a pretty broad search, but you can also get kind of an idea of what iDigBio holds. You'll see that we have a lot of plant media records, and that's because herbaria have really been on the ball in the digitization. They've really been leaders, and come on, let's all be honest here. It's much easier to image in their flat herbarium sheets. So they also have maybe in some ways an easier go of it. So, and then here is our advanced search, and this is where I spend most of my time interacting with the data. I'm going to first point you to our search all fields records. So this is a little bit of a trick in that, so for instance, let's do, I'll put in pine. And this is where I find, so I do a lot of teacher workshops, and this is where I find this is usually what people are drawn to first because it's at the top. And a lot of, especially non-scientists, will want to search for organisms in their area, maybe not in a way that we would normally think of organizing. They would put something like a common name like pine and not even a specific common name. And you'll see that it pulls up quite a bit. And also you'll see that it pulls up a lot of different organisms, not just pine trees. And that's because it's a search all fields. And so it's looking for the word pine in all fields. So not just in the common name field, but also, though we do get quite a bit of pine, but also in, say, this organism was collected on Pine Street or in Pine Cream or in Pine County. It's literally pulling up every instance of the word pine in all records. So it might be an interesting way to kind of start your search, but it's definitely not an exact searching method. So I wouldn't recommend it if you really wanted to have exact results. So if you say, for instance, Sorry, and it's a little slow here. I guess I should spell long leaf correct. There we go. If we do that search, and my computer's kind of hanging up, but you'll see that, oh wow, we're actually starting to get a little bit shorter, a little bit, less records, a little bit more. And so we have Pinus palustris there, so we're starting to get the, the exact specimens that we're probably interested in. But you'll still see that there's some variety. You're getting mostly Pinus, but you're still getting some variety. So although the search records might be a good way to browse, I wouldn't recommend it for a way to, start a research project or create a checklist. So the first place that I usually start is at scientific name if I'm looking for a specific species. So let's go for the red-cockaded woodpecker. And I realize that this actually isn't the most up-to-date name species. It's Picoides borealis, or vice versa actually. Picoides borealis is the old one and this is the new one. So we have this handy button here called Add EOL Synonyms, which really helps because a lot of museum records are constantly updating their nomenclature and might not be quite updated for the specific species that you're looking for. So we partner with EOL to provide this synonyms button. So you'll see here, once you have a scientific name, it'll give you some points on a map in which you can interact with. You can zoom in. You can look at media, which has some specimens. A lot of these preview and available are actually from Macaulay Library, so they're actually audio files, which is pretty cool. So if you're looking to create a report or do some outreach materials and you want to include some calls or some video of organisms, you can quickly find data about that. And then you can also so this is your list data. So we went through media data. We also have a labels view. This is especially I think of interest for the collections community. They're used to looking at data in a labels format, so we provide that. We also have a list of record sets. So these are all the people that have provided data about red-cockaded woodpeckers. So say you're really interested in interacting with places that hold specimens. That's where you're going to find that. And then this is your list. So this is the data in a kind of spreadsheet-like format. These can all be sorted. So maybe you're interested in finding places with specific localities, or maybe you're interested in looking at who's collected. You can sort by that, and that'll take a second. And you also notice that since I searched for a very specific species, that the number is much smaller, and the accuracy of my search is much higher. So we have 668, and the majority of those were probably going to be red-cockaded woodpeckers. Another thing that you can do while you're viewing your data is you can add any columns that you'd like. It comes with a certain set, but say you're interested in type status, you want to find only holotypes, or you're interested in date collected, you're only interested in looking at red-cockaded woodpeckers from the 1990s, and you can sort by that. And you can also add additional filters to your sort itself by here, going to add a field. You can add anything from taxonomic terms to specimen terms to collection events to localities. And I will definitely show you guys in just a second how to do that. You can also have sorts here in the sort tab. So you can sort the data then bys and decide whether it's ascending or descending. But finally, if you're really happy with the search and you really want the data that you've been browsing and looking at, you can do that by entering your email here, and it will send you a file with CSV for both the raw data and also the data itself, the raw form and the corrected form, sorry. All right, I'm going to go ahead and reset because I've made it really angry at me for doing a million things and also running the portal through Zoom. There we go. I'm going to show you how you can search for multiple species. So we were earlier talking about longleaf pine, and there's often co-occurrence of longleaf pine red-cockaded woodpeckers. So maybe you guys are interested in those two species. So what you can do is enter the scientific name, and then you hit just an enter bar, and then the next species that you're interested in. And then you can also hit add EOL synonyms, and it'll add EOL synonyms for both. So as you can see, now you have this nice map that shows some points for both longleaf pine and red-cockaded woodpecker. So say you're interested in learning more about a specific record. Say there's one here that you weren't really, like you didn't really believe that identification. There's a lot of times there's outliers, and sometimes those are data errors, and sometimes those are true outliers, as you guys know. It's thinking. So you can click on an individual point, and you can look at the data this way. It gives you kind of a quick synopsis that this was, and then you can also view the record. And when you go here, you'll see that this was a Macaulay Library audio, so they actually have an audio of the specimen. And so that means you could, decide right here from your computer whether that sounds like a red-cockaded woodpecker. You can also look at all of its data. So taxonomic information, specimen information, collection event. It was collected in 1997 in Texas. It has lat long coordinates that match being in Texas, so you know that it wasn't just an error of entering that data. And then you also have, and I think this is the most important thing to point out, you have the contact information for that collection. So if you needed to borrow that specimen, talk more about that specimen, you really still have an issue with that data point, then there's a way.
Molly, can I say one thing real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
So this Macaulay Library, Macaulay's project, which was I think, a really well done and very nice project, they actually tried to find specimens that match the recordings that they have that go back years and years. And so they digitized their recordings. And so the recording might be at Macaulay Library at Cornell, and the specimen might be at the University of Kansas. And so they wanted to virtually reconnect these things so that we have a specimen and we have a recording of those specimens. And Mike Webster and his group there have also been very involved in trying to look at new ways to identify what specimens are. So oftentimes with birds, phenotypic tape and recordings can be almost as good as a specimen in terms of identifying where something actually is. So they've been working really hard to try to convince NSF that there are other kinds of specimens that they call media specimens that are valid. We'll see how that goes, but in many cases with birds, it seems to be true, even more true than it is with plants.
Absolutely. And then, so what I just did is clicked on the media record in the portal, and it took us actually to the Macaulay Library. And I wanted to show you guys this as well. If you are interested in their media records, they have some metadata that, in addition, that we do not display, but is very interested to ornithologists and conservation biologists. For instance, if you were interested in listening to this red-cockaded woodpecker, they record their background species, and then they also include how the media recording was created. So that's pretty specific to the Macaulay Library, but I wanted to give that a show. Oh, this thing is very annoying. It keeps making it so I can't go between tabs. Okay. And so you can also, what I wanted to show you was add a field. So maybe you're interested in a higher taxonomic order that's not at the species level. So you can go to family. Maybe you're interested in the corvids. I don't know why I'm bird themed this time. I'm not an ornithologist, but so maybe you wanted to look at just all of the corvids. You can also do this for locality. So for instance, you could look at locality. You could look at state. So these are all the corvids that in the state of Florida. It's just loading.
Molly, you might want to explain why it is that it looked like Michigan or something was in Florida.
Oh yeah, so in Indiana.
Yeah, Indiana.
So this is an error in that the state and province is labeled as Florida, but the latitude and longitude is labeled as this point in Indiana. And so that you'd have to go to the specimen record and kind of take a look and see which one was flipped. Did they incorrectly put the state as Florida, or did they get a minus wrong? So that happens. You know, these are huge data sets and errors occur, and I often use this as a teaching moment when we're talking with teachers or students that you know, even scientists make errors, especially at the giant aggregated level. So we should always be looking at this kind of data with in a critical eye.
We do a little bit of trying to filter some of those out. I mean, if it's not possible, I know there are a number of institutions that neglected to put the negative sign prior to the longitude, and so we end up with these records that are like in Africa or China, and they're really in Wisconsin because it's just a mistake. And if our guys at the data level can figure that out, they will sometimes send flags to the collections to say this, you know, this can't be right. But we don't like to change things that people send us. We may have a presentation layer that's slightly different than what they send us if we think we can correct it, but we really would rather them do the changing in the original data and then send it back to us.
Yeah, so that's a really great point, Gil. And so this is the data that we visualize, and for each specimen record we also provide flags, and this is for the data provider just as much as it is for the data user. So we're letting this provider know, for instance, that we added the country code. It was missing, and we assumed based on all the other data that this record was in the United States, and we added that country code. But we always provide both our raw data and our corrected data, and I put that in parentheses because we really do minimal corrections at this point, and we never change the data, but we do provide both. And so this is the data in its raw form. So providers and users can always go back and look at that and make sure there's no discrepancies. So let me see, where was I? So we're back in Corvidae in Florida. And so another way to look at locality-wise, because we saw that there was a discrepancy between the latitude-longitude data and then the written data in the state field. So another way that you can examine is by drawing a bounding box, either with a circle or a square, and that would be using those latitude-longitude data. So let's say I'm interested in this kind of Midwestern region right here. And so it will, through that bounding box tool, create a mapping lat-long bound for you. And I definitely recommend either using that or the state data, because we do know as data creators, I know you guys are all collecting data in various forms, even if it's not specimen data. And it's really hard to come up with, you know, consistent ways of entering a qualitative, you know, locality string. We're always working really hard at it, and I see Deb Paul is on the call, and that's one of the things that she's been really working with the community. But still, so if you search for And also things have multiple names. So if you're interested in a state park, for instance, so you could add locality, and you're interested in Torreya State Park. And I know I don't say that correctly, Gil. So correct me. Torreya. It's Torreya, right? Torreya State Park.
Torrey, name for John Torrey.
Torreya State Park. It's thinking on it. But the answer is you're going to maybe get some records from Torreya State Park that's in Florida, but you also might find other places in which people use the word Torreya. And also similarly, if you're looking for collectors, people enter names completely differently. And we can do that search in a second as well to show you guys kind of the heterogeneity that oh, it's not even telling me. All right, I know that there was, so it's probably just the slowness of it. But yeah, let's go to collected by. Oh, you know what? I still have our bounding box on. That's why. So we have 21 records here collected by Bedell. And if we add a column and add collected by, we will see how that would be entered. And you'll see some people entered it as H. Bedell, some people entered it with HL. So there's a lot of heterogeneity that still exists in this data. And so sometimes you'll have to deal with that when you're doing large searches. So
Molly, I see there's a question from Matt. It says, in your example of Torreya State Park, does the Torreya tag come in with the record from the source, or does it get added on your end? We don't really add any of that kind of stuff. Am I right about that, Molly?
Yeah, that's correct.
So if it says Torreya State Park, then somebody recorded that on the label and it got transcribed into the data record. But what Molly was doing, trying to draw a bounding box that includes Torreya, then you will get those records in Torreya, even those that don't say Torreya State Park, because you're using the bounding box instead. You just may have to do a little clipping on your own to get rid of the stuff that may be in the box, but actually outside of the boundaries, the legitimate boundaries of them. We don't have the ability to follow a boundary, for example, because that would create a huge data set to all the points around the edge of a boundary.
Yes, exactly. And I got my Torreya search to work because I got rid of that previous bounding box. So we couldn't get Torreya to work earlier because of my error of not clearing this, not clearing the bounding box that I had done earlier. But here is the current search. And you'll see there's a lot of points that are around Torreya, but they're not all in. And that's because of the fact that there could be multiple places that are called that. Or it could be the locality was like 50 miles south of Torreya, for instance. But if we, let's see, if we cleared this, oops, and then actually zoom in and do a bounding box over, you'll see we'll get different specimens. And I saw that there was also a question about the map viewer, and it says here that it was, it's an open source JavaScript map service.
So I answered that question incorrectly. We used to use CartoDB, but I think they probably changed off of that. Our guys are pretty quick to pick up new technology.
They are, and yeah, we did use, I remember using CartoDB, and those maps that you showed in the PowerPoint, I used CartoDB to create But since then, I feel like they've moved away, and now they're more of a pay-to-play platform. So I haven't been using them as much personally because I don't want to pay, which is probably bad because sometimes we should pay for really good services, but I digress. So I just drew a bounding box over Torreya. And it's thinking. Does anybody else have any questions though? That was basically what I wanted to show you guys, just some really basics of how the portal search is done.
So we have one question. Have you considered adding the ability to load a shapefile instead of manually drawing a bounding box? I'm interested in getting data from 42 state parks. So I think our limitations with that, Matt, is that based on our funding from the NSF, we are not supposed to be actually, this sounds kind of crazy when you look at this portal, but we're not really supposed to be designing and building and writing software. So that would be a tool that we would probably have to write stuff for, and we don't do as much of that, partly because of funding limitations.
Yes, I think
you could submit probably a shapefile, the data file associated with the shapefile suite to the API to get data back.
Yes, and also there's this feedback button. I think, and I agree with Gil that we aren't supposed to be building tools, but I've often thought that would be a pretty widely used tool, or even the ability to create something other than a square or a circle. So being able to click and draw a complex polygon, around Torreya State Park, for instance, would be something that a lot of people would use. So if you hit that feedback button, you can directly send a message to the portal developers that would be a feature that you'd be interested in. And the more, votes for a feature, the more likely we can kind of push for that. So that's kind of my spiel of yes, please let us know that that's something that you would use, you would use the portal if it had a feature that did that.
Right.
Also, there is a 30-second survey. I don't know if any of you guys saw that during my spiel here. But if you do go onto the portal yourselves and use the data, either whether it's just to visualize something or create a checklist or actually for research, please take that survey, because we're using that data to show how people are using natural history collections data. So I really stress to use it to do the survey for us.
So somebody asked, have you considered, drawing a complex polygon would be helpful? And I was about to answer that, but I'll just answer it here. Yes, it would be helpful. Complex polygons have huge numbers of points in that perimeter, which end up being a huge processing issue. I've run into the same problem with ArcGIS on a big machine. You hit the point where you're beyond the ability to even download it, because it won't hold, because the system you're holding to send it down with won't hold all of those points. So it's problematic. It would be great. It would be great for us to look like ArcGIS, but and that's another issue. When we start adding some of this stuff, then folks say, yeah, that's nice, but it doesn't look like ArcGIS. And probably we'll never be able to do that because of the different paths we're on. But it will interface. You can download an interface with ArcGIS, because I've done that lots, to create your own specialized maps. Somebody also asked a question about, will it assign the state or the county to a record, or the park? Well, if you download the data, you will see those data. You'll see where it says what state or what county or whatever that happens to be with that record. And that can help you then process those data for what you're trying to achieve.
Yes, absolutely. And if I had more time, I'd definitely go into what the downloads look like, because that's definitely what we hope people will do. Just use this portal to find the data they need, and then download it and extract it and put it in whatever program that you guys are used to, because we're not going to create an infrastructure that's going to meet all of these diverse needs. So that's definitely, at the end of the day, we just want the portal to be a kind of a way for you guys to shop for the information that you need. and then you'd visualize it or analyze it in whatever program that you're interested in doing.
So here's an interesting question from Theodore. Have you considered the legal considerations, et cetera, for when people want to somehow use this information in advocacy and legal protection, perhaps as a form of evidence in a court of law? The only real consideration that we've given to that, I think, is the fact that if institutions do not want to send us information that they consider to be sensitive, then they should not send it to us, because we don't do any redaction and we don't do any masking or any of that kind of stuff, because we just don't have the staff and personnel to do it, and we don't want to. Something can be endangered in one state and not the next state, and if you've got a plan across the line, we could be marking things and it would take forever. But for legal purposes, we would think an attorney, and I've dealt with some legal stuff with plant locations and that kind of thing, trying to indicate some evidence for a court. I think what would have to happen there is the person using the data would have to follow up with the source of those data and then vet it before they went into court. So these data are as good as the data that the folks send to us, which is good. But when it gets down to a legal restriction about could this plant be in this place and therefore this guy's probably guilty, I believe I'd do some pretty serious investigative work before I made those kind of claims.
And then Kim has a question about uncertainty values associated, and that's definitely true. That yeah, and I'm having internet issues as well. I was trying to show you guys where the rights and information like that would be for media records, and my computer's frozen. So hopefully you guys can hear me. But museum locality data often has uncertainty values associated with them. To my knowledge, that data is not indexed, which means not searchable through our portal, but you do get all of that uncertainty information when you download the data in your CSV files. And Gil and Deb, who I saw was also on this call, can kind of corroborate that. But I think so it's not indexed, so therefore not searchable, but it's available through the downloads or through the API.
Can I still be heard?
Yep,
Oh.
I can hear you.
Because somebody asked me to repeat the answer. I'm assuming it was the answer to the legal question.
It was, Gil. That was Theodore, and he said that he lost his internet. And just for the record, we've had some pretty severe storms right here in Pennsylvania, and I know that there's a lot of them that might have something to do with some of the down internet we're seeing.
The gist of what I said is, without further research and vetting of those data, I don't believe I would use it in a legal situation where you're trying to use it as evidence that somebody has or has not committed a crime.
Yeah, without actually going to the source of the data, which is the collections.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
The other thing is we have some standard methods for georeference uncertainty, and then we have some other methods that people use. For example, I know that at Florida State for a long time, we used that this was georeferenced to a county centroid, or this was georeferenced to a location based on label data generated by a technician, or this was georeferenced to a state park centroid, or something that we had definite. And in our data set, we will, if there is no georeference provided with the record, then our system at FSU defaults to, as the georeference, it defaults to the county centroid, or it defaults to the smallest place we can get a centroid for. And then it's those data that get uploaded to iDigBio. So sometimes you'll find several records all in the same place. That means it's probably the county centroid that is being georeferenced. Not always the best, but it's for certain projects, that may be all you need to know in terms of distribution or whatever. But so you have to do a little bit of looking at the data, like Molly said, download it and take a look at it.
All right, the final thing I did want to show you guys real quick, when we were talking about legalities and things like that, it made me realize I didn't show you guys where you can find information about licensing for media especially. But my internet is being very slow, so I apologize for that. So maybe it won't come up. But lots of really cool media.
Well, not to worry, Molly. The same thing happened to Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. So.
What's that, bad internet?
Couldn't make their internet connection work for their presentation.
All right, well, I give up. But if you click on an image with better internet connection, it'll bring up a bunch of metadata associated with that image, which includes contact information if you had questions about usage of that image, along with the rights, the licensing that is associated with each image. All of our data is CC BY 0, but we do allow some different licensing for our images, though we do recommend the lightest licensing as possible. But most of it, of course, is like non-commercial use and things like that. So all in the realm of things that you guys could probably use for your reports or for identification guides and things like that. But I do say check those images before you do use them or share them. And always give credit to the collections that they came from, because as you guys understand, collections are around when people use them. So they really need to know when their data and their images and their other resources are being utilized, especially by conservation biologists and people outside of our community. They're really interested in hearing about your use cases.
So Kim made a comment that she has used museum records in the past for filtering museums and looking for the smallest polygon and the highest level of certainty on the records. And I think that's very, very helpful. The other thing that is very helpful with doing something like that is to look at places where you think they should be, or you think these specimens should exist or these species should exist, and then checking those places to see if they exist there. And I think that's very helpful. We've had a number of institutions now that are almost fully digitized. They look at their state, say Georgia. I talked to one the other day, and in Georgia, he said, gee, we had a whole line of counties for which this plant did not occur. We know that can't be right. So he and one of his students took off and went up and spent a day looking and collecting and documenting vouchers for that area. So that's another really good way to do estimations and find out, are they really absent, or are they just under-collected or under-reported?
And the answer to Milo's question is absolutely. We definitely include a lot of regional herbaria portals into iDigBio's portals, and CERNIC is a partner of ours and also a thematics collections network. So
yeah,
we have their data.
Yeah, CERNIC is definitely a TCN and work with the Symbiota portal. That's a great portal for the Southeast, and all of those data end up in iDigBio eventually.
Yep.
Awesome. I'm gonna step in here and sort of wind things up. Thank you everyone for all the fabulous questions. We will have the archive of this up very shortly. Ooh, I hope you guys can hear me. Are you hearing me?
Yep, we can hear you. At least
internet all over the place.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you too. Thanks, Kristen. And thank you so much to Gil and to Molly, to the iDigBio project, their respective organizations and institutions, and of course the U.S. Forest Service. I'm going to get this archive up as soon as I can. Watch your email for more webinars soon. And I wanted to mention just before we go, and I wish I had said it before, but thank you to iDigBio for being a sponsor of the 2018 National Natural Areas Conference. So they're involved, and they would love to see you there too, I'm sure. So
we would love to see you come to the symposium and ask hard questions.
Yeah,
absolutely. And please give us feedback on that portal demo, because we'll be doing something similar for the conference. So we'd love to hear what you guys liked and didn't need, wasn't applicable for your community. So
cool. All right. Well, yeah, thank you too, Jody. Thank you to everybody, Nastasha. That's it. I'll get it up as soon as I can. We want to thank you. Have a great day. Stay dry. And we'll see you all again soon. Thanks.
Thanks so much.